Life has been very busy recently, and will continue being busy for a while, so this isn't the video I was planning to make this week. However, I needed something simpler and quicker than my original plan, so this week I decided to generate a random aesthetic, then Google that aesthetic on Pinterest, and pick an image to turn into a character. The aesthetic I decided on is simply forest aesthetic, and the image I found is a cabin right by the edge of some dark pine woods with a meadow of daisies in the foreground. I decided that for this drawing I wanted a very similar background to the photograph, and in the foreground, a girl in a sweater running her hands through the daisies. My sketch starts out looking pretty rough, but eventually I figured out her pose and body shape. I think her hands remain too big through till the final drawing, but other than that, I'm happy with how she looks. I gave this girl a thick, oversized sweater that's falling off one of her shoulders, and a long, tiered skirt that's blowing in the breeze. She also has plaited hair with daisies stuck in her braids, a hairstyle I've rocked myself back when I had long hair. I didn't put a lot of effort into her shoes, because my plan is to have them almost completely covered by daisies and grass. Her hair is messy, with many flyaways in the breeze, and she has ribbons securing her plaits. The colors in this image are taken directly from the photograph, meaning everything is fairly dark, as this will be a dim and shadowy image. I wanted the sweater to have a knitted texture, like I've drawn before on different drawings. However, I did not want to draw each individual stitch, like I've done before. I also wanted a better solution for drawing knit in the future. So today, I spent around half an hour designing 3 simple knit texture brushes. A lot of this process isn't visible in the recording, as a lot of it was messing with settings, but the parts that are visible I left in for you to see. I made 3 knit brushes, using an image of a simple knitting project as a reference for the shape. The first brush I made is also the one that works best for my purposes, 9 outlined stitches that look a bit like a herringbone pattern. The second brush is just 2 stitches on top of each other. This brush works better for lines of stitches, or even thin braids, but less well for filling a large space with knitted texture. The third brush worked the least well, a pattern of a single line for each stitch. I didn't use that brush at all in this project. Instead, I used the first brush for most of the pattern on the sweater, then used the second, thinner brush to fill in any gaps and add a bit of texture variation, like this is a homemade sweater with some human flaws. I'm so happy with how this turned out, and while the brushes took a while to make, next time I draw a knit it will be so much quicker. Before moving on to the line art on the skirt, I added my now signature thick black outline around the edges. The many flyaway hairs made this difficult. The thick line isn't great for details, so I used a less thick brush for those hairs, as well as the tips of the braid and the ribbon. The skirt was easy to outline after the amount of time I spent on the hair and sweater. The 3 tiers of skirt are ruffled, with a triangle trim around each hem to mimic the shape of the upper windows in the house from my reference photograph. One side of the skirt is plastered against the character's leg in the wind, the other side billowing out. The trim is slightly warped around each ruffle, thinner where the ruffle curves and wider in the widest points of the fabric. I think it worked out pretty well. I started coloring with the sweater, using the lighter parts of the dark pine forest as my color reference. I paused to change the color of the sweater and stitch lines a few times, but the end product, I think, looks amazing, and I'd love a sweater of my own that's this color. The skirt colors are based on the colors of the house. The triangles are the shade of grey that in different light would be white of the windows and walls. The rest of the skirt is a dark reddish brown, the color of the roof. Her hair is the color of the path, looking like a light brown right now, but in the context of the dim colors, it's a golden blonde. Her eyes are green like the grass. I started the background with a very rough blocking in of each section of color. I'm keeping the path through the meadow of daisies, the thick pine forest, and the mountain and cloudy sky. The only element of my reference photograph I'm not keeping is the house. I started adding details with the grass, using a few different concept brushes of grass and plants. The grass in front of the character is completely covering her shoes and the hem of her skirt, as I planned. Most of the grass is made up of concept brushes, but I also drew in some stalks myself with a regular line art brush. Once again, I'm making use of custom Photoshop brushes, something I really need to remember to make use of more often. This brush is a daisy, to save myself drawing each daisy in the meadow individually. This is an art shortcut I love about digital art, and I think it's completely fine to use shortcuts like this in art, especially if you're making the brushes or patterns yourself. The daisies are bigger in the foreground with visible yellow centers, and in the background it's more of a wash of white dots among the green grass. I added a simple brown path winding toward the trees, then began drawing those trees. I figured out a good method to draw pine trees a few months ago, and I've been sticking with that method since. It's quick and easy, and for background trees, which don't need a whole lot of detail, it works great. Behind the front row of trees, I just used a textured foliage brush to fill in all the white space with black and dark green. The final background details are added with a mountain and a cloudy sky. I then added a vignette around the background for some simple shading and to enhance the dimness of the image. Then I got to return to the character to start shading her. I started with the skin again, but I'm not super happy with how it came out. I think the fact that the skin is already darker from shadow tripped me up, as well as my decision to randomly use purple for the shadows rather than a dark red. I think I managed to get the skin to look okay in the end, but boy was it a process to get there. The hair is a different story. the shading on it worked really well. I love shading braids, they're so easy for me, and I think her hair turned out fantastically. The rest of the shading also went well. Most of the elements in the image are elements I find fairly easy to shade. A ruffled skirt, a chunky sweater packed with enough texture that the shading won't be obvious if there are mistakes, and another pass over the braided hair. I probably should have added some shadows from the grass cast on the girl's skirt, but I didn't think of that until now. The sweater shading worked out great. It was fun to do and fairly low stakes. Shading things that are already dark is always more fun for me than shading whites or pale colors, where every mistake shows up like crazy. All in all, this was a fun, simple image for me to work on. I made a few brushes that I'm sure will get plenty more use in different images, and I made a cool, cozy character who I think looks great and has a great sense of style. Thank you for watching this more laid-back video, and until next time, bye!